Hello, this is Chris Wilhelm, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Friday, June 19th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Our first article today, Vance lashes out at Israeli critics of U.S.-Iran agreement to end the war. The vice president said that the United States was the only powerful ally Israel had left, and noted that 2/3 of the weapons that protected Israel were paid for by U.S. tax dollars. By Jonathan Swan, Erica L. Green, Max Birak, and Michael Levinson. Vice President J.D. Vance delivered an extraordinary rebuke on Thursday to Israeli officials who had disparaged the U.S.-Iran deal, as he began a campaign promoting the agreement in the face of criticism in Israel and Washington. Speaking to reporters at the White House, Mr. Vance said he had a message for members of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet who had denounced the deal and had very personally attacked President Trump. Donald J. Trump is the only head of state in the entire world who is sympathetic to the nation of Israel at this moment in time, and he happens to be the head of state of the world's superpower, Mr. Vance said. If I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world. Mr. Vance said he wanted to remind the Israelis that 2/3 of the weapons that protected your homeland were American-made and paid for by U.S. tax dollars. His blunt message, effectively telling the Israelis that they have been diplomatically isolated and have Americans paying for their defense, was the latest sign of tensions between Mr. Trump and Mr. Netanyahu just over 3 months after they launched a joint bombing campaign against Iran. Israel is not a party to the deal to end the war, and its fighting with Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed militia in Lebanon, had threatened to derail the U.S.-Iran talks, to the frustration of American officials. Mr. Vance's remarks came a day after Mr. Trump admonished Mr. Netanyahu over the Israeli military onslaught in Lebanon. Mr. Vance also pushed back on criticism from some Republicans in Congress who have argued that the deal grants Iran major financial concessions while punting critical decisions about its nuclear program into a 60-day negotiation period. Mr. Vance said the Iranians had to change their behavior under the deal and that the United States maintained economic, diplomatic, and military leverage over Tehran if they did not comply. We have all the cards, Mr. Vance said. If the Iranians want the benefits of the bargain, they have to give us the things that are necessary to get the benefits. The deal calls for a ceasefire while U.S. and Iranian officials begin discussions on the future of Iran's nuclear program over the next 60 days. Mr. Vance said that he would lead those negotiations and that technical discussions could begin as soon as this weekend. He said he might travel to Switzerland to start those talks with the Iranians. As they dial up their good behavior, we can dial up the economic relief, he said. If they dial down their good behavior, we can turn it off. It's the good thing about having the leverage, and it's a good thing about being the United States of America, where we just fundamentally have so much influence in the world financial system. The deal, however, lays out several benefits for Iran that begin immediately upon the implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding, which Mr. Trump and President Masoud Pezeshkian of Iran have signed. Those benefits include the unfreezing of Iranian assets and the removal of the U.S. naval blockade on ships entering and leaving Iranian ports. The agreement also calls for the U.S. Treasury Department to immediately waive sanctions on Iranian oil exports, allowing Tehran to sell oil at higher prices to a wider array of buyers. Other elements of the agreement, like broader sanctions relief, would take place on an agreed-upon schedule as part of the final deal to be negotiated over the next 60 days. Mr. Vance said that by temporarily lifting sanctions on Iranian oil, we're actually going to be able to see a bit where their financial system actually sends money and receives money, and that's a real benefit to the American people. But some Republicans say the deal throws the repressive Iranian government an economic lifeline. Reagan is rolling over in his grave, Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican of Louisiana, wrote on social media. Mr. Cassidy, who lost a primary election last month after Mr. Trump targeted him for defeat, added, "Iran's nuclear ambitions were not curbed, and they will have learned that threatening the Strait of Hormuz works and will undoubtedly leverage it in the future. Now, Iran gets to build brand new infrastructure under this deal." Senator Roger Wicker, Republican of Mississippi and chairman of the Armed Services Committee, referring to the U.S. military operation against Iran, said in a statement that he was concerned that the Memorandum of Understanding negotiates away the victories of Operation Epic Fury in ways that are completely out of step with the president's goals. He singled out a $300 billion fund outlined in the deal and designated for the reconstruction and economic development of Iran. Even though it would not be financed by American taxpayers, Mr. Wicker said it would make Iran's payoff under President Obama's 2015 deal look like a pittance by comparison. President Barack Obama's government signed a deal with Tehran in 2015 that tied sanctions relief to specific goals related to its nuclear program. Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance have emphasized that no U.S. government money will be spent on the $300 billion fund and that it will be used as a conduit for private investment. But the fund has become a sore point for Mr. Trump, who has spent years railing against Mr. Obama for releasing $1.7 billion of Iran's own cash after his administration brokered the nuclear agreement. Mr. Vance noted that this deal also called for commercial vessels to once again sail freely through the Strait of Hormuz, the critical oil shipping route that Iran effectively closed at the start of the war, driving gas prices higher. He pointed out that gas prices have fallen since the agreement was announced. On Thursday, the average price of a gallon of gas in the United States dropped below $4 for the first time in months. Still, gas prices remained about $1 higher than before the first U.S.-Israeli strikes began in Iran in late February. In his first statement on the deal, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei, said that Mr. Trump had agreed to the terms out of desperation and warned that Iran would not submit to excessive demands from the United States during the next 60 days of talks. Mr. Trump has threatened Iran with more attacks if he believes it is not abiding by the deal, but his advisors have said privately that it's hard to imagine he would return to military action against Iran, especially before the U.S. midterm elections. The agreement also seeks to end the war between Israel and Hezbollah by requiring the United States and Iran, along with their allies, to immediately and permanently end their military operations on all fronts, including Lebanon. But Israel and Hezbollah have indicated that they will not be constrained by the agreement. In brief remarks on Thursday, Mr. Netanyahu said that Israeli troops would remain in southern Lebanon for as long as Israel's security needs demand it. He added that additional challenges lie ahead of us that will require calmness, a firm stance on our security interests, and at the same time maintaining the important connection with our American friends. Some members of the Israeli government took a harder line. Bezalel Smotrich, the far-right finance minister, called the deal bad for Israel and for the entire free world, period. Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister, said Israel would not be bound by the agreement. "We love the USA and are grateful to President Trump," he wrote on social media, and yet the state of Israel is not a banana republic. Supreme Court narrows law banning drug users from owning guns. The justices sided with a Texas gun owner who faced criminal charges after admitting to marijuana use, argued that a federal gun law violated the Second Amendment. By Abby Van Sickle. The Supreme Court on Thursday narrowed a federal gun control measure, siding with a marijuana user who had challenged a provision that had banned drug users from owning or possessing guns. The justices ruled that the government's use of the law was overboard, sweeping together recreational drug users with people addicted to drugs who posed a danger to public safety. Justice Neil M. Gorsuch wrote the decision. All of the justices agreed with the outcome, although several wrote separately to explain their decision-making. "We appreciate that drugs and guns can sometimes make for a dangerous mix," Justice Gorsuch wrote. However, he wrote, the justices rejected the government's expansive theory in the case and found that a historical analogy the government advanced to laws barring habitual drunkards from owning guns fails under every measure it asks us to consider. The case, U.S. v. Hamani, was one of two major gun rights cases to come before the Supreme Court this term, providing opportunities for the court to clarify how to apply a test set out by the justices in a landmark Second Amendment ruling in 2022. In that case, New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, Inc. versus Bruin, the justices required courts to analyze the constitutionality of gun restrictions based on the country's history and tradition of firearms regulation. The case decided on Thursday drew additional interest because it involved the same statute that had been used to convict President Joseph R. Biden Jr.'s son Hunter in 2024. Mr. Biden pardoned his son just days before leaving office, shielding him from the threat of prison. The justices announced that their decision did not address the part of the statute involved in Mr. Biden's case, which specified that people addicted to drugs cannot own guns. Justice Gorsuch wrote that the court's decision was a narrow one, dealing only with people who use drugs. The court was not addressing efforts to ban addicts or those presently intoxicated from possessing a firearm, he wrote. He added that the decision left the door open for Congress to adopt other laws if it determined that users of a particular drug pose a special risk of misusing firearms. The justices also wrote 3 concurring opinions to offer additional thoughts. One came from an unusual pairing of Justice Samuel A. Alito, Jr., one of the court's most conservative members, and a former federal prosecutor, and Justice Elena Kagan, a liberal. The two joined together to explain why they did not believe the government should compare historical laws dealing with drunkards to a modern effort to bar guns from marijuana users. Marijuana use today is like alcohol use at the founding, Justice Alito wrote on behalf of the two. It is widespread and increasingly considered socially acceptable in many quarters. And from a practical standpoint, law enforcement widely tolerates the use of marijuana. The case before the justices focused on the constitutionality of part of the Gun Control Act of 1968, legislation passed in response to the assassinations of Robert F. Kennedy and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. The law, which had been amended in the 1980s, bans gun possession by anyone who is an unlawful user of or addicted to any controlled substance. The law was challenged by Ali Hamani, a Texas man whose suburban home was raided by federal agents in August 2022 after his family had come under suspicion because of its ties to Iran. When agents searched the home, Mr. Hamani told them that he had a handgun locked in a safe inside the house. He also told them that he used marijuana about every other day, pointing them to about 60 grams of marijuana in the house. In addition, agents also found cocaine in his parents' closet. 6 months later, Mr. Hamani was charged with 1 count of possession of a firearm by an unlawful user of a controlled substance based on his marijuana use. After he was indicted, Mr. Hamani challenged the constitutionality of the law. His lawyers had also disputed prosecutors' versions of events. In briefs to the court, they told the justices that Mr. Hamani was a high school honor student and football player who graduated from the University of Texas at Arlington before going into project management. They pointed out that neither Mr. Hamani nor any member of his family had been charged in connection with any crime related to links with Iran, saying that prosecutors had unfairly made terrorism-related insinuations about Mr. Hamani and his family based on their religious and ethnic identities. The case scrambled the usual political allegiances, with the Trump administration weighing in to defend the law, along with Everytown for Gun Safety, a group backed by former Mayor Michael R. Bloomberg of New York, a Democrat. On the other side, supporting Mr. Hamani, were the National Rifle Association, the American Civil Liberties Union, a law school clinic that specializes in helping Muslims affected by counterterrorism policies, and the Drug Policy Alliance, which supports decriminalizing drug possession. With nearly half of Americans reporting marijuana use at some point in their lives, this ruling protects the rights of millions and curbs the government's ability to impose arbitrary and discriminatory penalties, Cecilia Wang, the ACLU's legal director, said in a statement after the ruling. The oral argument in the case in March was lively, as the justices posed colorful hypotheticals wrangling over where to draw the line between drug use and dangerousness. The justices had puzzled over unlawful use of Ambien and Xanax, and even mulled how the law should treat the use of substances that could cause impairment without addiction, like the psychoactive brew from the Amazon that causes hallucinations. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Federal energy regulator seeks to limit conflicts over data centers. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission directed grid managers to make changes that protect individuals from higher electricity bills while giving data centers access to power faster. By Ivan Penn. A federal energy regulator on Thursday adopted guidelines that it said would help protect individuals from shouldering some of the cost of connecting data centers to electric grids. Its new approach would also make it possible for data centers to connect to grids faster if they agreed to certain conditions. In a unanimous decision, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission directed the organizations that manage electricity grids to make changes to address the growing frustration among many Americans that data centers are expanding too fast and driving up their energy bills. The Commission called on grid managers, utilities, and other players to provide detailed information about how spending on new transmission lines and other equipment to serve data centers affects the rates paid by individuals to ensure that homeowners and renters were not effectively subsidizing technology companies. In addition, the Commission said grid managers should allow data centers to connect to their networks sooner if those centers were near electricity generation sources, offered to build their own power supply, or were willing to reduce how much energy they used during periods of high demand, like on very hot or very cold days. U.S. technology companies in recent years have been building dozens of power-hungry data centers to develop artificial intelligence as they try to one-up one another and tech firms in China. That has contributed to an increase in energy demand, driving up the cost of power for everybody connected to the grid. We are setting the stage for a resilient, reliable, and forward-thinking grid that empowers communities and safeguards consumers by transforming the way large energy users access the grid, said Laura V. Sweat, the chairman of the 5-member Federal Commission. We can facilitate both, which is exactly what we did today. States and the electricity industry have been hoping that the Commission would develop rules to ensure individuals and small businesses were not paying more for energy because of data centers. At the same time, technology companies wanted to shorten the time required to connect data centers to the grid, a process that in some places can take several years. Thursday's decision, utility industry experts said, appears to have found a way to meet both goals. This seems to be a surprisingly well-constructed federal energy initiative, said Tyson Slocum, director of the energy program at Public Citizen, a nonprofit research and consumer group. On its face, the new principles seem to be productive in terms of attempting to shield consumers from cost shifts and ensuring transparency. Electric grids across the United States are increasingly under strain. Many of the lines, transformers, and other equipment utilities use are aging. In some places, demand for electricity is also rising as more people use electric cars and heat pumps. And then there are data centers, some of which can use as much power as a mid-sized city. The Data Center Coalition, which represents the industry that develops the facilities, said it believed the decision helped technology companies connect data centers faster to continue benefiting the economy, security, and the global AI race. The coalition said it did not oppose paying its fair share. The data center industry is committed to paying the full cost for the energy and infrastructure it uses to ensure that those costs are not shouldered by homes or other businesses, said Aaron Tinjum, Vice President of Energy for the coalition. Data centers are working at the local, state, regional, and national levels to make good on that commitment and pay for major investments in our grid for the benefit of all ratepayers, he added. Residential customers across the country are increasingly opposing new data centers because of concerns about the rising cost of electricity, the center's water use, and other environmental and economic effects of such facilities. Data centers are expected to be a major issue in some elections this November. The Federal Commission's decision on Thursday will not quickly result in changes on the ground. The organizations that manage regional grids, like PJM in 13 eastern states and the Mid-Continent Independent Systems Operator in the Midwest, will now spend months making changes in consultation with the Commission, experts said. This is a bold move by this Commission, said Rob Gramlich, president of Grid Strategies, a consulting firm based in Washington. It's a necessary step, but it's not sufficient. People are looking for the issue to get resolved. Trump administration backs off plan to end ocean monitoring. The reversal comes after the Senate passed a bipartisan bill on Wednesday to block the removal of deep-sea monitoring instruments. By Maxine Joselo. The Trump administration is abandoning its plan to dismantle a $368 million ocean monitoring system critical to understanding climate change and marine ecosystems, bowing to a bipartisan backlash on Capitol Hill. The National Science Foundation had said in May that it would begin removing hundreds of underwater instruments this month that collect data on coastal flooding, marine heat waves, and other climate and weather events. But the agency announced on Thursday that it will pause efforts to take apart the system, known as the Ocean Observatories Initiative, while convening an expert panel to determine its future. Effective immediately, NSF will not proceed with further removal or de-scoping of equipment, the agency said in a statement. The Senate passed a measure Wednesday that would block the government from dismantling the system, with lawmakers in both parties warning that the action would be illegal and would threaten the safety of coastal communities. The Trump administration had also tried to cut the program's funds the last 2 years, but Congress restored the money both times. In May, the Science Foundation had said it would send ships to start pulling up instruments anchored to the sea floor off the coasts of Oregon, Washington State, Alaska, North Carolina, and an area between Greenland and Iceland known as the Irminger Sea. For the past decade, scientists have used data from these instruments to understand how the ocean is absorbing greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, how marine heat waves could affect fisheries, and how soon a vital ocean current could collapse. Fishermen have also checked the real-time, publicly available data on wind and wave conditions before heading to sea. And meteorologists have used these observations to improve forecasts of disasters like hurricanes and tsunamis. The National Science Foundation said on Thursday that it already had pulled some buoys, sensors, and other instruments from the water off the coasts of Oregon and Washington State, but it was developing plans to redeploy the equipment after servicing. Edward Dever, a professor of oceanography at Oregon State University who helps manage the instruments off Oregon and Washington, said the agency had removed 6 of the area's 7 moorings, or deep-sea platforms equipped with sensors. He said finding boats to replace the moorings could take several months. I believe we could have 1 mooring ready to go before the end of the summer and 1 to 2 others ready by fall, Dr. Dever said in an email, adding ships are generally scheduled about a year in advance. Scheduling cruises on short notice can sometimes be done, but it is a challenge. The Senate on Wednesday passed the measure to preserve the system by unanimous consent, essentially an agreement by all senators to bypass debate. Though the measure faced an uncertain fate in the House, it was the latest moment when Congress flexed its power of the purse to thwart the Trump administration's attempts to cut climate and environmental programs. The measure was sponsored by Senators Jeff Merkley, Democrat of Oregon, and Lisa Murkowski, Republican of Alaska. In an interview on Thursday, Ms. Murkowski criticized the Trump administration for failing to consult Congress before beginning to remove some monitoring equipment. NSF moved forward on their own, not only unilaterally, but really with no warning, no heads up, she said. They didn't even bother to check in, she added, and that's where the real foul was. Ms. Murkowski said fisheries in Alaska relied on the ocean data to determine how increasing temperatures were threatening certain species. She said other data was crucial to understanding El Niño, the powerful weather pattern that formed this month in the tropical Pacific and could supercharge extreme weather events around the globe. The National Science Foundation had said in May that dismantling the monitoring system would save $48 million in operating costs each year. But lawmakers had accused the administration of wasting the $368 million in taxpayer dollars that had funded the installation of the instruments in 2016. And the operating costs represent a tiny fraction of overall government spending. Dismantling the OOI was supreme stupidity, Mr. Merkley said in a statement on Thursday. Representative Zoe Lofgren of California, the top Democrat on the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, welcomed the administration's reversal but said she would continue fighting to save the system. This pathetic scheme was illegal, Ms. Lofgren said in a statement on Thursday, adding, "My oversight team and I will be following closely what NSF does next. NSF's next steps will be nothing short of replacing any of the instruments that have already been removed and ceasing all activities to descale until legitimate expert advice has been sought." Backlash had also come from overseas. After the Trump administration announced the plan to dismantle the system, the European Union said it would bolster its own observation of the world's oceans with an investment of 92 million euros, or $107 million. Though that move had been planned long before the U.S. retreat, officials in Brussels emphasized the contrast. Extremely worrying signals are coming from the other side of the Atlantic, Kostas Kadis, the European Union's Commissioner for Fisheries and Oceans, said at the time. A spokesman for Mr. Kadis did not immediately respond to a request for comment on Thursday. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Ukraine bombards Moscow with one of the biggest drone attacks of the war. The attack, which shut down the capital's airports for several hours, was part of an escalating campaign to bring the conflict home to Russians. By Paul Son and Natalia Vasilyeva. Black smoke from a burning oil refinery filled the Moscow sky. The city's 4 airports were urgently closed, and part of the busy highway that rings the Russian capital, a metropolis of 13 million people, was shut down. As Ukraine escalated its efforts to bring the war home for Russians, the strikes on Thursday appeared to be the largest drone attack on the Russian capital since President Vladimir V. Putin launched the war more than 4 years ago. No deaths were immediately reported, but the large-scale assault seemed likely to feed fears among Russians that the Kremlin's ability to isolate society from the impacts of the war was sharply eroding. That would usher in a new stage for a conflict that has now run longer than World War I. For days, lines have formed and rationing has been implemented at gas stations in dozens of Russian regions as persistent Ukrainian drone attacks on oil refineries and processing facilities have threatened a fuel shortage. Ukraine has taken particular aim at Crimea, the peninsula that Russia illegally annexed in 2014, with a range of strikes aimed at cutting off the region's supply lines. The Russian economy has also begun suffering from the costs of the war in a way that the Kremlin had managed to avoid for years. President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, in a voice memo shared with journalists on Thursday, warned, "If Ukraine burns, then your Moscow will burn as well." Mr. Zelensky cast the drone onslaught as a response to an attack this week on the Pechersk-Lavra monastery complex in Kyiv, one of the holiest sites in Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Russia claimed that the complex had been hit by an errant Ukrainian interceptor missile. Mr. Zelensky has been emboldened by technological and production advances in Ukrainian drone warfare that have enabled his government to send larger swarms of drones into Russian airspace and overwhelm defenses. The Russian Defense Ministry said that during the attack on Thursday, it downed 992 drones countrywide, the largest number in a single attack in the war and a significant increase in scale from prior Ukrainian onslaughts. It also said it downed 4 long-range cruise missiles that were part of the assault. Hardliners in Russia responded to the assault by urging the Kremlin to unleash the country's full military capabilities to prevent Ukraine from escalating attacks within Russian borders. How much further Russia, which has the world's largest nuclear stockpile, can go with its conventional arsenal is unclear. But the calls from the hardliners raised the prospect of a new cycle of escalation, with the virtual stalemate along the front line giving way to competing airborne bombardments far from the battlefield. "We must strike the enemy mercilessly, without hesitation," Andrei Guryulov, a former general and a lawmaker in Russia's governing party, told the Russian news outlet RTVI. He called on Moscow to eliminate the entire leadership, destroy all command centers, bring the entire industrial sector to its knees, and achieve success at the front. It is far from clear whether the increased pressure at home will push Mr. Putin to end the war. Moscow has stated that it will not stop fighting until its forces take the rest of the Donetsk region in eastern Ukraine, or the land is handed over in a peace deal, as Washington proposed last year. Kyiv still holds a swath of territory about twice the size of Rhode Island in the region, which includes cities that have been heavily fortified since 2014. Mr. Putin did not address the Ukrainian attack during comments on Thursday afternoon at a summit of Southeast Asian leaders in the Russian city of Kazan, and Russian state news broadcasts minimized the attack. Russian missile defenses shot down at least 194 drones that were flying toward Moscow in several waves on Thursday morning, Sergei S. Sobyanin, the city's mayor, said in a statement. The drone strikes injured at least 17 people in the Moscow region, according to Andrei Y. Vorobyev, the area's governor. All of Moscow's airports shut down for most of the morning before gradually reopening early Thursday. Mr. Sobyanin said that some of the Ukrainian drones had struck a sprawling oil refinery that towers over the city to the southeast, and that had been targeted in a smaller attack on Tuesday. Ukraine's defense ministry published dramatic footage of a roof at the fuel facility flying into the air as the installation was engulfed in flames. Residents of Moscow's southeastern areas woke up Thursday to the thuds of Ukrainian drones crashing into the refinery. Soon, plumes of toxic smoke hung over several neighborhoods, with images online showing the aftermath of rain that seemed slicked with oil falling from the sky. The Moscow region's Environment Ministry advised residents to limit their presence outdoors, while denying reports of an oil-laden rain, describing it as rainfall infused with soot. There were no sirens or notifications from the emergency services. Nikolai, 44, who lives in a neighborhood northeast of the refinery, said by phone from Moscow. Photographs taken from his house showed billowing smoke, although the refinery is 4 miles away. It was clear from the start that this one was way more serious. Since early morning, we've been able to see at least 2 sources of fire there, he said, comparing Thursday's attack to the strike on the refinery on Tuesday. He asked that his name be withheld because of possible repercussions from the authorities for discussing the strikes. Nikolai, who called himself a staunch opponent of Mr. Putin and the war, said he had always thought that Russia's aggression against Ukraine would eventually come back to haunt the country. He said that neighbors in his mostly working-class area appeared to be spooked, but many are still unable to make a mental link between Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the attacks at home, he said. People in the yard outside this morning go around asking something like, "How is that possible?" he said. I see anger and confusion, but I don't think people can still put two and two together. It's like they were told for a long time not to look up, he added, and now it's as if they have lifted their heads for the first time and it's impossible not to look up. A 20-year-old employee at a Moscow school described feeling genuinely frightened, like many in the city, but noted that others were trying not to think about it and were pretending that everything was normal. The employee, who asked not to be named for security reasons, said that more assaults on the capital were likely, and that the school was preparing a shelter, which suggested that its administrators expected things to get worse. The refinery that was attacked on Thursday covers some 40% of Moscow's needs for gasoline, and the strikes were likely to further strain supplies across the country. The Moscow authorities said that gas stations across the city were working as usual. Ukrainian drones also damaged Moscow's largest open-air market on Thursday, according to Mr. Sobyanin, the mayor. One of the city's largest shopping malls had to shut down after a drone attack, Mr. Vorobyev, the regional governor, said in a statement. Another drone rammed into a high-rise residential building in the suburb of Zhukovsky, according to the local mayor there. Russia has pummeled Ukraine with ballistic missiles and drones in recent days, damaging the monastery complex and other sites. No casualties were immediately reported in strikes against Kyiv early Thursday. Many Russians have become nervous about sharing imagery and video online of the increasing Ukrainian attacks. The Moscow Anti-Terrorism Task Force last month issued an order restricting the publication of photos and videos showing the aftermath of Ukrainian attacks. A pro-war Russian blogger told the online outlet Soda that he had been summoned by the police after sharing a video of the attack on the oil refinery earlier this week. Vladimir Solovyov, a hardline state news commentator, said everyone who sends such material needs to be jailed, and publicly at that. He urged Russians not to panic and to draw strength from family stories, a reference to previous times in Russian history that were worse. If you feel you can't go on, if you're wringing your hands in despair, well, just make up your mind. Leave if you are weak. If there is nothing Russian in you. Follow the path of traitors, Mr. Solovyov said in a clip that circulated widely online. Afghanistan issues ban on smartphones for civil servants and military. Those using their phones at work will see them smashed and face punishment, according to a written order from the Taliban government's highest court. By Saifullah Padshah, Yaqub Akbari, Atullah Omar, and Ilian Peltier. Afghanistan's leader has ordered all civil servants and members of the country's armed forces to stop bringing their smartphones to work as of Wednesday, the latest restriction on individual freedoms imposed by the Taliban government. Some government agencies have scrambled for alternatives, reverting to regular cellular calls instead of WhatsApp, which they overwhelmingly rely on as they try to keep a country of 45 million running amid economic isolation, devastating aid cuts, and a conflict with neighboring Pakistan. Afghanistan's highest court issued the order, but it did not provide a justification for it. Government representatives did not respond to requests for comment, but 8 civil servants, police officers, and education professionals in 5 provinces confirmed the authenticity of the ban and said that it had begun taking effect in their offices. We have received the order and are in the process of implementing it, Khalid Ahmad Fazli, a communications official in Daikundai province, told the New York Times. Another provincial official and a press officer for the Supreme Court also confirmed the implementation of the order on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to comment publicly on the ban. Those caught using their smartphones will have them smashed and face punishment, according to a copy of the order circulating online. As news of the ban ricocheted across social media, civil servants and security personnel posted videos of colleagues smashing their smartphones to comply with the new rule. In the clips, some workers said, "Our work shows obedience to the Emir's order," in a reference to Sheikh Hibatullah Akhundzada, the ultra-conservative cleric who rules Afghanistan and ordered the ban. A police officer in Samangan province in northern Afghanistan said that the Supreme Court had sent a letter announcing the ban to his headquarters, and that a senior police official had told officers on Tuesday, "Be careful not to use smartphones. This is an order from the Emir, and we cannot oppose it." The employee, like others interviewed for this story, spoke on the condition of anonymity out of fear of retaliation. In Nangarhar province, in the east, a high school teacher said that officers from the Taliban's morality police had begun confiscating smartphones at the school's gate on Wednesday. A WhatsApp group for teachers and administrative staff has gone silent, he said. Since the Taliban returned to power in 2021, they have stifled freedom of expression by repressing protests, controlling what people wear, and restricting access to social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and Snap. Last September, the government imposed a countrywide internet blackout for 2 days under the guise of preventing immoral behavior online. A similar rationale seems to be at play with the latest ban. During a meeting earlier this month in the southern city of Kandahar, religious scholars and judges from a military court asked Sheikh Hibatullah to issue a countrywide ban on smartphones to prevent what they described as the spread of pornography and corruption, according to one participant and another person briefed on the meeting. Other religious and administrative leaders also asked the sheikh for a total ban in a separate meeting the following day. Sheikh Hibatullah then issued a mandate that he said would target, as a first step, all soldiers, civil servants, teachers, and government officials, according to the Supreme Court order. Those seeking exemption must obtain written permission from the supreme leader. It was not immediately clear how the order would be implemented. Hundreds of thousands of people work in the Taliban-ruled administration or serve in its security forces. An employee in the financial department of Herat province said that his office had received the order from the Ministry of Finance, but that as of Thursday, he and his colleagues were still using their smartphones at work. Many members of the Taliban movement do not bring their smartphones to government offices as they deem them immoral and distracting, even though most of them own one. As of 2024, there were 25 million mobile subscriptions in Afghanistan, according to the World Bank. Asadullah, a civil servant in central Afghanistan, said the ban had already left him struggling to complete his daily tasks. He said, "Out of habit, I checked my pocket several times today, and it felt as if I had lost something." You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Iran gets major economic lifeline for minimal concessions in initial deal. The agreement delays the most difficult steps for Iran for later talks, while granting its crucial benefits. By Yegani Torbati. An initial agreement by the United States and Iran to halt their war grants Iran major economic benefits, while delaying the toughest concessions that Iran would eventually have to make on its nuclear program. The agreement lifts the U.S.-imposed naval blockade of Iranian ports and, most crucially, grants Iran waivers to export its oil before the negotiation of a final agreement on its nuclear program. That will give Iran a critical economic lifeline. In recent years, its economy has been in a tailspin with a collapsing currency and sky-high inflation. The one major step to be taken by Iran is reopening the Strait of Hormuz to free passage for the next 60 days, though the agreement seems to leave open the possibility of charging fees after that period. On balance, the memorandum appears to favor Iran, said Nicole Grajewski, who teaches at the Center for International Studies at Sciences Po in France and studies Iran's foreign policy. Tehran secures movement towards sanctions relief, a pathway for the restoration of oil exports, access to economic benefits, and a reduction in military pressure while making relatively limited new nuclear commitments. But many of the most difficult concessions that the United States sought have been postponed, she said, though it is possible a future agreement could rebalance each side's concessions and gains. But judged solely on the memorandum itself, the immediate and concrete benefits accrue disproportionately to Iran, Ms. Krzyzewski said. The agreement stipulates that the United States must begin lifting its naval blockade of Iran immediately, and that Iran must allow commercial traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, but it was unclear whether those steps had occurred. Nevertheless, the news that the two countries had agreed to the deal sent oil prices downward, with the average U.S. gasoline price hitting less than $4 per gallon on Thursday for the first time in months. Critics are alarmed by the oil sales clause in particular because it also commits the United States to temporarily lifting banking restrictions to help facilitate Iran's oil trade. Broadening authorization to financial transactions would crack the core architecture of U.S. oil and financial sanctions against Iran, arguably the most powerful leverage the U.S. holds over this regime, absent the naval blockade. Miyad Maliki, a former U.S. Treasury official and a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, wrote on social media. The Trump administration has said that the interim deal maintains the United States' leverage over Iran and that the final one will include verification of Iran's compliance with nuclear restrictions. It also said that removal of all sanctions depends on a fundamental transformation of Iran's behavior, including ending its support for militant groups abroad. Do they actually think we're going to release the sanctions on the Iranian system if they're still funding a terrorist organization? Vice President J.D. Vance said in an interview with New York Times Opinion published on Thursday. But while many restrictions on Iran will remain during the interim before a full deal, the country is likely to benefit to the tune of billions of dollars in resumed oil sales. Those who favor diplomacy with Iran praised the memorandum, saying it offered the chance for a new page in U.S.-Iran relations. The measures in this agreement should not be read as concessions, but rather corrections to a decades-old policy of coercion that was an abject failure and made war inevitable, Jamal Abdi, the president of the National Iranian American Council, an advocacy group, said in a statement. Iran's collapsing economy has been a source of discontent for the Iranian people over the last decade. Since 2017, 3 large rounds of protests have kicked off over economic concerns and quickly led to protesters calling for fundamental changes to Iran's system of governance. The last round, which began in December after a steep drop in the value of the rial, Iran's currency, resulted in the demonstrations being brutally crushed by authorities. Increased oil revenues would help shore up the rial's value and ease pressure on the government's budget, giving Iranian consumers and taxpayers some relief. But government corruption and mismanagement are also major causes of Iran's economic woes and are likely to remain so in the immediate term. Some analysts were puzzled over why a similar agreement could not have been made before a months-long war that has killed Iranian civilians, destroyed parts of the country's infrastructure, and enabled Iran to exert leverage over the global economy. It's difficult to escape the conclusion that these negotiations could have taken place without a 3-month war, said Holly Dagres, a senior fellow at the Washington Institute. Much of what is outlined in the agreement, including the Strait of Hormuz, which has historically remained open, could have been addressed through diplomacy. And she pointed out that the agreement left the most difficult issues, including the precise limits to be imposed on Iran's nuclear program, for later talks. I'm skeptical that the next 60 days of talks will produce concrete results, she said. This is merely kicking the can down the road. Taiwan's president says he trusts Trump to approve arms sale. President Lai Ching-te made the hopeful remarks after Mr. Trump suggested he could use a proposed $14 billion arms package for Taiwan as leverage with Beijing. by Chris Buckley. President Lai Ching-te of Taiwan voiced high hopes on Thursday that President Trump would approve $14 billion in arms orders for the island, downplaying concerns raised last month when Mr. Trump suggested U.S. military support for Taiwan was negotiable, unsettling long-standing American policy. Mr. Lai gave an optimistic take on Taiwan's standing with the United States, which has taken a blow since Mr. Trump said in May that U.S. weapon sales were a negotiating chip with China, and suggested that Mr. Lai was a source of instability across the Taiwan Strait, a characterization often pushed by Beijing. Mr. Lai, speaking at a news conference for foreign media outlets in Taipei, sought to assuage concerns, describing Mr. Trump as a strong supporter of Taiwan. The island has for decades relied on military and political support from Washington to counter an increasingly powerful Beijing, which claims Taiwan as its territory. In the most extreme scenario, China could try to take Taiwan by force, risking a war that could draw in the United States. During Mr. Trump's first term, he approved $18 billion of weapons sales to the island, Mr. Lai said. And late last year, Mr. Trump approved an $11 billion arms package for Taiwan, drawing condemnation from Beijing. But Mr. Trump has held off a decision about $14 billion of missiles and other military hardware from U.S. companies, which Taiwan's legislature voted to pay for in May. President Trump's arms sales for Taiwan have basically met Taiwan's needs, and so we also have high hopes about these upcoming arms sales, Mr. Lai said when asked about the $14 billion package that Mr. Trump has delayed approving. I'm confident that after the U.S. government conducts a detailed review, it can be passed. Not all experts and officials in Taiwan are as confident in Mr. Trump, who has lately focused on building relations with Mr. Xi. When the two leaders met in Beijing in May, Mr. Xi warned Mr. Trump that Taiwan was the most critical issue in China-U.S. relations. Soon after the meeting, Mr. Trump told reporters that he saw the arms sales to Taiwan as a very good negotiating chip with China, which he is counting on to make major purchases of American goods. He also suggested that a long-standing American promise not to discuss weapons sales to the island with China was out of date. Mr. Trump later appeared to echo Mr. Xi's view that Mr. Lai was seeking independence for Taiwan, a step that Beijing has said could prompt war. Mr. Lai has said that Taiwan is already in practice independent and that he is not seeking a formal change to its status. Since taking office in 2024, Mr. Lai has made strengthening ties with the United States and other Western countries a key theme of his administration, but the uncertainties about Mr. Trump's intentions have cast a shadow over Taiwan's military plans and Mr. Lai's political prospects. Some Trump administration officials have recently become cooler in their rhetorical support for Taiwan. During his speech at a recent security forum in Singapore, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth did not mention Taiwan, a marked shift from his comments at the same event last year. To counter the anxieties, Mr. Lai and his officials have repeatedly cited statements from Trump administration officials that U.S. policy toward Taiwan remains unchanged. Earlier this month, Secretary of State Marco Rubio told the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that the United States does not consult with the Chinese on these arms sales, and the $14 billion package was under review. What I can confirm is that the United States security commitment to Taiwan remains unchanged, and that both sides are in accord on the goal of strengthening security and accelerating the buildup of Taiwan's defense capabilities, Mr. Lai said on Thursday. Still, experts have said that Mr. Trump may delay an approval of the $14 billion in proposed weapons until after a planned summit with Mr. Xi in September and possibly longer. If Mr. Trump approves even part of that package, the reaction from China could be intense, said Chai Chung, an adjunct associate research fellow at the Institute for National Defense and Security Research, a government-funded body in Taipei. Xi Jinping himself has linked the issue of arms sales to Taiwan to his own prestige, Mr. Shea said. If Mr. Trump signs off on the arms sales for Taiwan in coming months, Mr. Xi could postpone his visit to Washington and refuse to fulfill the purchase commitments that he made to the U.S. during the Trump-Xi summit in Beijing, Mr. Xi said. And finally today, while you were sleeping, they made money saving spots at the Knicks parade. High-demand events in New York City attract people willing to wait in line for hundreds of dollars. The Knicks parade is no different. By Ishani Desai. Samuel Powell was excited to celebrate the New York Knicks NBA championship at the parade in Lower Manhattan on Thursday, and he was also excited to make a few $100 before those festivities. Mr. Powell, 30, channeling the entrepreneurial New Yorker spirit, was among those who were being paid to wait in line to secure a good view for a different person to watch the parade. It's witnessing history, but at the same time, getting paid makes it even better, Mr. Powell said. He was enlisted to wait in line for about $600, starting at midnight until about 7 a.m., he said. He was hired after offering his line waiting services on Airtasker, a platform that helps people hire others to do odd jobs for them. I compare it to like making money in my sleep, because I don't really have to do too much, Mr. Powell said. I'm just holding down an area. Mr. Powell, who lives in New Jersey, said he would wait in line with his friends, who could hold his spot if he had to use the restroom. He said he would pass the time by working on his phone. Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch said millions of people were expected to descend on Lower Manhattan on Thursday and that the department would deploy 10,000 officers. As the viewing areas fill with parade watchers, officers may turn people away. Mr. Powell said he would be in constant communication with his clients in case the police start to limit how many people will be in this section. The parade begins at 10 a.m. and officers began allowing people into viewing areas starting at 6 a.m. Robert Samuel, the chief executive of Same Ol' Line Dudes, a company that provides people to wait in line, has coordinated his team to wait in queues for the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, Halloween parades, and Pride parades. But they have never worked a ticker tape parade, which he said introduced some uncertainty on when and where the best places to wait should be. This is all an experiment, Mr. Samuel said. Mr. Samuel charges a $25 flat rate per hour with a $15 overnight fee. But on some platforms that allow line sitters to set their own fees, listed rates reached $1,000 for 2 people on Wednesday. The advertisements on Airtasker offer services including hourly text messages and photos verifying a person's desired location. Mr. Samuel planned for his staff to wait in line until 5:30 a.m., and then his clients could take their spots to enjoy the celebration. We're hoping that works, Mr. Samuel said on Wednesday. We don't know how dense the crowd will be at 5:30 a.m. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Friday, June 19th issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Chris Wilhelm. Thank you for listening, and happy Juneteenth.